Well, Joe, you have a new piece in The Atlantic. It's out just moments ago, and it's on my favorite topic, which is where America stands with the world as the NATO summit starts. And you write this: America is doing just fine. You argue, quote, Uncle Sam deserves a modern-day Atticus Finch to argue his case before the American people. And you also write in part, quote, liberals once gained favor among their base by attacking the Pentagon's top brass, but now it is Republican members of Congress who longingly swoon over Russia's manly military while trashing U.S. generals and our men and women in uniform. Those GOP attacks come despite the fact that America's military is more powerful today relative to the rest of the world than at any time since the Second World War. Unlike in years past, American allies no longer grouse about the U.S. leading from behind or burrowing itself into a self-defeating America first hole. Instead, the U.S. is first among equals in a dynamic and expanding NATO alliance that just added a new member with more than 800 miles of Russian border, and that has provided a devastating response to Vladimir Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine. Looking east, the United States has finally begun its pivot to Asia, strengthening military cooperation with Japan, the Philippines, Guam, South Korea, and Australia. The current disruption in U.S.-Sino relations may have less to do with spy balloons and diplomatic missteps than with Xi Jinping's rational fear of being hemmed in by an increasingly muscular U.S. military presence surrounding the South China Sea. President Joe Biden's recent diplomatic overtures toward India were likewise calculated to contain China's regional ambitions. Childhood poverty has dropped to the lowest level on record. Teenage pregnancy has done the same. The U.S. dollar has experienced generational highs over the past year. Unemployment recently hit a 54-year low. The number of job openings this past year also hit record highs. Overall, the U.S. economy continues to surge forward despite economists' dire predictions. America's GDP grew to $25 trillion last year. Texas has a bigger economy than Russia, and although California is routinely rebuked by right-wing critics, it has the fourth strongest economy in the world, stronger than Britain's, France's, Canada's, or India's. The United States and its European allies collectively run an economic machine that doubles China's stagnating output. Despite record debt levels, a stubborn case of inflation, and other structural challenges, American capitalism continues to drive and dominate the world economy. Though a fulsome defense of Uncle Sam often requires dialectical thinking, but remember this. Even with all of its failings, America has fed and freed more human beings than any other country in history. And despite the blather that cable news hosts spit at you daily, your country is doing pretty damn well. And I think it's fair to say Joe Biden has led that international effort.
Well, he certainly has. I mean, this is something I was also saying during the Trump administration, during the Obama administration, during the Bush administration. I've been saying for quite some time, not on the foreign policy side, because I will say on the foreign policy side, Joe Biden has done extraordinarily well. Afghanistan, the one challenge, which I discuss also in this column, it was done. It was promised by the past three presidents to do the same thing. And 70% of Americans supported Joe Biden doing that when he did it. Even 55% of Americans supported him after he did it. The purpose, though, of this column wasn't to talk about Joe Biden or Donald Trump or anybody else. It was to talk about America. John Meacham, as I was going through the 4th of July reading, it was 75% of Americans think we're going in the wrong direction. I could find another poll, though, that says 75% of Americans say their economic standing is good or excellent right now. And there's this bizarre disconnect between perception and reality. I also go down so many things in this column about, for instance, Republicans now have become the new lefties, trashing, college campuses, doing everything but taking over, presidents' offices in universities, despite the fact every year our universities and colleges are ranked the best in the world, and the most powerful people in the world desperately try to get their children into our universities. The smartest kids on the planet come to our universities, and yet they're constantly trashed as woke and weak. And we hear all of this, John, and there's just a massive disconnect. The fact is the United States is the most powerful, most productive, most successful country on the planet, and yet we never hear that from our politicians year in and year out.
Well, I think one of the great disconnects that you've pointed out is between people who talk about these things publicly, people who poll on them, and then in a cycle then talk about the polling results, and what people genuinely think. And my own sense is that part of the wages of having such a radically polarized political class, which is to say those who have an economic, cultural, and often ideological stake in an unfolding political drama, because of that polarization, it's not in anyone's interest to say what you just said. Because what's interesting about, hey, everything's good. Yeah, there are problems, we should work on it. That's not going to get people outraged. It's not going to guarantee advertisers that people are going to tune in. You need, on the right, you need to think that the world is ending and that President Biden bizarrely is leading these end times. And on the left, you have to be perpetually on edge about fascism at home. And there's a hugely legitimate reason to worry about fascism at home, because the only threat, the main threat to the world, the American state that you just described, is internal. Right? It's that we will gnaw on ourselves. Mm-hmm. We will let appetite and ambition overcome a kind of constitutional order where we're not perfect, but we're trying to get a little more perfect, and where democratic capitalism can, in fact, create prosperity and possibility for others. I just think that part of the main problem, and I think this helps explain the president's polling numbers, is that there's little incentive in a polarized political climate to say what you just said, however true it is. And I think that's what the case that has to be made again and again. And it may be that the people who decide the 2024 election are not watching us this morning, are not tuned in to the minute to minute, but who are in about 5 or 6 states and are going to assess the state of the nation sometime next year. And I think that that's not necessarily a bad thing. Where it does create a cost, though, is that what we're seeing this week with President Biden going to NATO with this unfolding story this is why we have presidents. This is why we need serious people to be president. Because I was looking at the map you had. Look at that. Look at the size of Russia, the size of NATO. This is great power stuff that can go. Look at that. That can go wrong.
It's amazing.
And don't you want a grown-up sitting there to get the call?
Nobody would have imagined that map. Yeah, nobody would have imagined that map, John Meacham, in 1981, in 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed, even in 2000, or even in 2017, when there was a president who was trying to undo NATO. It is extraordinary what has happened. And of course, Vladimir Putin's responsible for most of it by his missteps. But no, you're exactly right. That is an incredible map to behold. As James Stavridis said, Admiral Stavridis said, we've turned the Baltic Sea into the NATO lake.